Welcome to today's programming tutorial. Today we're going to look at variables, constants, and inputs. Starting us off, let's have a look at what exactly a variable is. A variable is a container that can store any piece of data, and a variable uses something called an assignments operator to assign data to the variable. To create a variable, the first thing you need to do is come up with a name. Let's say I'm going to store my name. A suitable name for this variable would be name. You can call the variable whatever you want, but just keep in mind that you shouldn't use spaces. Next, I need to tell the program what is being assigned to name. To answer that question, I'm going to put an assignment operator here. An assignment operator is shown as an equal sign. Then after that, I can put the data. This is exactly the same as in our last lesson when we went over data types. In this case, I'm putting a string in that says Mr. McAuliffe. This is storing the string Mr. McAuliffe and it's assigning it to the variable name. Why is this useful? Well, we can now use this name variable to output any way we want. For example, if I want to print out the name, I can write the name variable over here. If I run this program, you're going to find the name variable appearing in the output, Mr. McAuliffe. You can store any data type you want in this variable, or any data in this variable, and you can change what's inside the variable as well. Let's say after name, I change the variable name, so instead of Mr. McAuliffe, it equals John. If I print out the name underneath here, you're going to find that we get Mr. McAuliffe first, followed by John second. This is because, as you might remember from last lesson, programming reads from top to bottom. That means we're going to assign Mr. McAuliffe to the variable name, we're going to output it, we're then going to change the assignments to John, and then we're going to output it again. Keep in mind, the variable data type is the same as whatever data is stored inside it. For example, if I write name : plus, and I use a concatenator operator to join this string to the name variable, I won't get an error because name currently stores a string. If I remove this and I change name to age, and I put age as 29, when I put age over here as a string, and I concatenate it to the age variable, I'll end up with an error because age stores an integer, and here we're concatenating a string with an integer. Like we talked about last lesson, you will need to typecast the age variable or use another method to make sure that everything inside the print statement is of a similar data type. There we go. Now, in programming, sometimes we want to have a variable that doesn't change. For example, pi. Now, this is an issue in Python because Python doesn't really allow you to create constant variables. So what we do to pretend it's a constant variable is we write the entire word in capital letters and we separate it with an underscore. If you're using Visual Studio Code and you create a constant variable in Python, it'll change it to a different color. In this case, it's changed the color to orange. Just keep in mind that although we are saying that this is a constant variable, i.e. a variable that isn't allowed to change, in Python we can still change it. The reason we do this is that if we work in an office together, or we work in a team, our other team members will know that we don't want that variable to be changed. This acts like any other variable. See? Lastly, let's look at inputs. Inputs, much like outputs, has its own subroutine. In other words, the developers of Python have created a bunch of code to get user inputs. In this case, it's just a command input with two brackets. Nothing needs to go inside the brackets, but we could pose a question to the person by writing something like enter your name. Keep in mind that with input, you don't have to specify anything in the brackets. Now, let's see what happens when I run this subroutine in the program. I get a little icon here to show me that I have to enter information. I can enter information, and I can press enter to continue. Notice the program stops. This is because we only have one line of code so far. But what happens if I want to print out the input? Say, I would say welcome plus the name. I could put the input variable in here, but let's use our skills that we've learned today to find a more efficient method. In this case, I'm going to store the input inside of a variable. Because this is storing the name of the user, let's use the name wording again. And we're going to use the assignment operator to store the input inside name. Now if I write name in here, I have a complete program. I enter my name as Mr. McAuliffe. You'll see it says welcome Mr. McAuliffe. This tells you something about the input variable. It tells you that the input variable by default is a string data type. So what if we wanted to create a simple calculator? Number 1, input enter number 1, and a second one, input number 2, enter number 2. If I wanted to add number 1 plus number 2 based on the user input, this would not work. Watch what happens when I run it. If I enter 50 and 10, I get 5010. That's because they're both strings. Like last lesson, I can use typecasting to convert whatever's been inputted by the user into an integer. Now, because they're both integers, when I run 50 and 10 again, I get 60. So in this way, you can create your own calculator. Now, there's a bit of a tip and trick that you can use when it comes to print statements. So let's go over that. Let's say I had a name here, and I'll put an input here again. Enter your name. And let's say I had an age here, and we'll store it as an integer. If I wanted to print both of these out, I'd have to do a bunch of concatenation methods, either using the plus symbol or using the comma. But there's another way, a quicker way, and a more concise way of doing this, called f-strings. How does an f-string work? We start our print statements by writing the letter or typing the letter F. Seems a bit weird because we're not putting it in speech marks, but just keep it like that for now. Then we put a speech mark. You'll notice there's the F that turns into a purple color. And then we're going to type in our string. In this case, we'll say name is something. I'll put an underscore here for now. And age is something. So what do we put in these underscores? Well, we want to put the name variable. We can't just put name like this because when we write a variable, we have to write it without speech marks or not inside speech marks. Well, if we have an F at the beginning and we started an F string, we can put our variables inside curly brackets. Notice that it changes color to white. I've got our purple brackets around it. I can do this for age as well, but let's make sure that the age is the same data type as everything else. So I'll put string age here. So this shows you that you can do anything you want inside these curly brackets. But the cool thing about it is that you can insert the variables directly inside of your string instead of having to concatenate everything together. This is the difference between doing that and doing this. So you see, the top one in line 5 is much neater and easier to read than the one in line 7. And if I run this program, you'll see it outputs correctly, all inside the same string. So use f-strings to make your printing that much easier. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful.